Hi, welcome back to the Leadership Enigma, or indeed welcome to the Leadership Enigma. If so, where have you been? Welcome. Hopefully you're listening to us on all your major podcast platforms, or indeed you're watching us now on our new YouTube channel, which we're incredibly excited about. So in this episode, we have to really take a look at the fact that all leaders have problems, but how do we solve those problems? And perhaps there are some tips, tricks, or even a framework to consider in relation to how we deal with those problems. And also consideration of those problems that keep identifying themselves. So maybe there are some patterns to understand as well. Like all episodes, I need to talk to someone far wiser than me. Come back to me just after this break, where I have back in the studio the wonderful Dr. Katie Best.
You're listening to The Leadership Enigma, powered by Transform Performance International, a podcast for the insatiably curious to explore the power of human-centered leadership to create real momentum for positive and sustainable change. Whether you're an entrepreneur, business owner, or corporate executive, each week we speak to global experts, academics, rising stars, ambitious upstarts, and disruptors as we discover that success leaves clues. Now, here's your host, Adam Pacifico.
So welcome, I've got the wonderful Dr. Katie Best with me in the studio. Katie, welcome back.
Thank you so much, Adam.
Now, I have fond memories because you were with me in the studio. You might remember for the 1 year anniversary.
Yeah,
remember?
That was so exciting, especially because it was the first time I'd seen any real human beings for quite a long time.
I know, that was very pandemic-esque,
Yeah.
wasn't it? And so here we are, 130 odd episodes into the podcast, a brand new look and feel. We're now supported very much by Transform Performance International and LaunchPod Studios. I've always got to mention James and the wonderful who's waving at me, LaunchPod Studios. So I just want to say thank you, really, because you were one of the first guests who just kind of believed in having a conversation with me. And now the Enigma itself has turned into something different. I don't know where it's going, but it's turning into something different.
Different and awesome. And it's been amazing to have like that tiny role in your journey. It's been brilliant.
Well,
You've
that's
done
why
such
it's
a good
so
job.
cool to have you back. And so just tell the listeners and the watchers now, who are you? Tell us a little bit about, I know about your background, but tell everyone a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so where I'm at right now is I'm a leadership coach and consultant, and I work with leaders on their messiest problems. That came from originally being an academic, but really wanting to engage with leaders on the real stuff that was going on for them rather than being just in a uni. So I still have a visiting fellowship at LSE, but I spend a lot of my time running my own leadership coaching and consultancy practice.
Is this almost academic to pracademic?
Yeah,
in some
pracademic.
ways?
I mean, I kind of love and hate that word, but it does sum it up brilliantly, doesn't it?
Does it do what it says on the tin? I don't know. Tell me why you've always been interested in leadership. What's the passion for leadership?
I think, well, I obviously love working with human beings. That's great. And I think leaders are in such a difficult but ultimately really powerful position in that they can change the lives of everyone who they lead, and have such a big impact on the organisations that they lead in or the teams that they lead in. And so I think helping them to understand what they can do well, where things aren't going well, and helping them out with those issues just really excites me.
Do you think as the world's gone slightly mad, and with everything that's gone on, everything that's going on, and everything that will go on, because it's just going to be chaotic from here on in, isn't it? What do you think is now the responsibility on leaders of big and small companies? Because, we talk about perhaps organisations actually having a bigger responsibility to make the world a better place than governments. So what are you seeing or hearing or your thoughts on the role of the leader now, just in general life?
Yeah, I mean, we've focused for a long time, I think, on leaders needing to be inspiring and motivating and driving a way forward. And I think that all still stays really important. But I think that role of being quite grounding as well and being a sort of solid presence in a team or an organisation's life is also really important, and a voice that can kind of speak through all the chaos, both about this amazing future direction, but also just about the here and now and what it feels like to be here. And to genuinely listen to people and what's going on for them.
Do you know what? I did a wonderful keynote yesterday with the public sector. I can never say no when the public sector says, "Could you just come and help us out?" I always have to say yes. And I remember saying to them, because actually it was a room full of individual contributors who are aspiring managers and leaders and who will go on to that. And I actually said to them, I just want to get your thoughts on this, that actually you're all leaders, because every single day you are communicating, galvanizing, inspiring, leading people over which you have no direct authority. And in fact, you're probably role models to people you don't even know who they are.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts in relation to that? Actually, this isn't just about people with the title of leader, but this is about everybody in business and leading themselves and having an impact on people around them. This is everyone.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think the more that we can see we all have the ability to lead on even a very small personal level, as you say, leading ourselves, but also all the way up to a team and ultimately maybe for some of us an organisation, all of that counts as leadership. And I think it's really healthy to see it in that way, because it shows that we've all got a really important role to play. And I don't mean that in a kind of woo-woo sort of way at all. I just
Nothing wrong with woo-woo.
But I just think fundamentally, you know, it's great to feel that we've got that control, that power, that ability to make a difference.
And there's a real emphasis, isn't there, on leading self, almost before we think about leading others and leading organisations of whatever size. There's got to be a real emphasis on leading self, hasn't there?
Yeah. Definitely.
And we're all work in progress. Well, I'm certainly work in progress, but we're all work in progress, aren't we?
Yeah, completely. And I think, it's great the fact that there is that focus now on, you know, well-being, and I mean that in a very genuine way, like genuinely checking in with ourselves and making sure that we and the people who are around us are okay, resilience, these sorts of things. We just can't get anywhere if we can't manage to lead ourselves in this way.
So leaders of, you know, organisations of any size, whether it's sole traders and small, medium businesses to large monolithic organisations that you and I used to working with as well. Leaders are having to deal with problems every single day, which is, we know, and the world is throwing sometimes new challenges at leaders. But I want to talk to you about how leaders can help solve their own leadership problems, because they're dealing with these day to day, sometimes hour to hour. And they're becoming more complex, more complicated, more chaotic, all of these things. And we've heard the term VUCA as well. Yeah. You know, that volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous environment. And many people have heard that for many years. Tell me why you started to focus, and your new book is going to be on kind of the ability of a leader to solve leadership problems themselves. Yeah. Tell me what's behind that.
So I think often we start in the wrong place. We start with the idea that leaders need a model or a theory or a framework, and if all leaders are authentic or servant leaders or collective leaders, then the world's going to be fine. But the reality is that those models drive everyone, no matter what context they're in, no matter what problems they find themselves, in one direction. And those models are great as a tool in a toolbox, but can't single-handedly deal with the complexities of life and the difficult situations that leaders today find themselves in. And so I think there's a real value in flipping it and thinking about leadership as a route to problem solving, a way to solve problems, and how leaders regularly face, I find in my own work, the same set or the same types of problems over and over again.
Okay. So I know in this episode, what I want to do is, I know you've identified 10 problems that keep coming up again and again and again for leaders, and we'll go through that list. But what we'll also dial into is you've created a framework, haven't you, which you call the 5 E's, which you can apply to trying to solve those problems. So we're going to dive into the 5 E's. But let's start in relation to the 10 problems, and there's a uniqueness to number 10, which we'll come on to. How did you go about identifying those 10? What was the research what was the work you were doing that you said, okay, I think I've got the 10 key ones that keep coming up? How did that happen?
So it's gut, but then checking in with that and refining and adjusting based on conversations with people who are leaders in the field who are facing problems. Okay. So having worked with leaders for, it's terrifying to say, but sort of 2 decades or more.
That gives you wisdom, Katie.
Yeah, it's good in that sense. Less good for the skincare, but it's all right. And then I've seen you see the same patterns come up again and again. So, for example, we've already mentioned self-leadership, but thinking about the problem side of that around personal effectiveness, there's real challenges for leaders in that particular area. So I was seeing these patterns recurring around 9/10 sorts of problems. I hadn't really grouped them at that point. And I thought, I'm going to sit and look at the types of things that regularly come up in the work that I'm doing. What am I being asked to help leaders solve problems on? And so came up with a list and then refined that list by talking to clients, coaching, people who I work with on coaching, other people working in the field of leadership research, etc.
Okay, so I want us to kind of go through that list so that anyone listening or watching can, in some ways, compare and contrast that list for themselves. But also, let's get the audience involved, because you need some help with number 10, don't you?
Absolutely. So I would like the audience to this podcast to help me work out what the 10th problem should be.
You're going to crowdsource it, right?
I'm going to crowdsource the problem.
Okay, so you want the opinions of those who are listening, watching, and we'll come back at the end of how they can get in touch with you. We'll put all the relevant links in there. So just so you know up front, problem number 10 is to be determined, and you can help determine problem number 10.
Yeah, I want to know what I've forgotten.
Okay.
What my blind spots have not led me to look at.
Okay. Well, let's list the top 10 then. Well, 9.
Yeah.
I should say. So you start us off, Katie. What? Just give us a list. What are the 10 common sets of problems that you're finding that leaders are dealing with?
To give people a kind of lens to think about it through, I've started with the small and worked out to the bigger things that. So starting with individual and working out to things that tend to affect organisations.
Okay, gotcha.
So problem 1, personal effectiveness. So problems with being personally effective, with achieving what it is that you set out to achieve, time management, etc.
Right.
Problem number 2, making good decisions. So how you go about finding the right evidence, the right data, and being fairly confident that your biases haven't kicked in.
Yeah.
Problem number 3, around influence. So having gravitas, making sure that you're able to find and use your power to get things to happen in the way that you need them to happen.
I'm always fascinated by that term, use your power. It's interesting because some people think, oh, that sounds Machiavellian, but no, it is about what is I always sometimes say, what's your leadership superpower?
Yeah.
How do you leverage the experiences that you've had? And how do you influence without authority as well? Things like that will come into that category.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, number 4.
Yeah, so then we move on to culture and values. So problems around culture and values. What happens if you as a leader don't fit your organisation's culture? What happens if your team members' values are out of line?
Right.
What happens if the culture's toxic? How do you as a leader handle some of these things?
Huge piece about role modelling in there as well, isn't there?
Absolutely.
So, okay.
Yeah. Then problems with performance.
This is number 5.
Number 5. How do you measure performance? How do you improve performance? What does good performance actually look like? And this is thinking both personally, but also from team and then ultimately organisation perspective as well.
Do you know what? As we're doing this, Katie, it's taking me back in time where I'm thinking this is almost like pop pickers. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
In at number 6.
Yeah.
Katie, what do we have at number 6?
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel
James
like we
is
need
laughing.
some
I can hear him laughing
Yeah.
already. That shows your age as well, James. But number 6.
Yeah. So then problems with engagement.
Yep.
So what we might have at one point called motivation, I think, is a broader and more complicated problem now around making sure that people really feel engaged with the work that they're doing, the company that they're working for.
And that's linked sometimes to purpose, isn't it, as well? Certainly for the
Absolutely.
younger generation coming through.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Then problem 7 around team performance. So here it's thinking about how teams work together, how you as a leader can guide a team that's got conflict, that's got fault lines appearing, into a place where they can work together really strongly, and what you can do to build those bonds and to harness that team.
Gotcha.
Problem number 8 is leading strategy. So leaders often know what the word strategy means, but then they get put in a position where they need to engage with it and they haven't got the first clue what to do. So it's thinking about how from frontline leadership all the way up to senior leadership, your relationship with strategy needs to develop and change, and where the problems with that might come from.
Okay.
Then number 9, problems with leading change. So I think we're all quite familiar with that, with kind of what that means, but going through some of those issues around what happens when change won't stick, when people don't want to commit to it, and making sure that's the right kind of change.
And is it fair to say that really the common denominator with all of this, it's all about people?
Yeah, it's absolutely all about people.
And I think that's really that's I suppose why it's been the passion and focus of this show, of this podcast. It is all about people. So number 10 is the to be determined. I don't know why,
Absolutely.
Mick. What am I doing that for? But, so number 10 is to be determined.
Yeah,
So
completely.
tell us, how can we now ask the listeners and the watchers and in all the social that we do around this particular episode, what is it you want from people?
I would love their ideas about what that 10th problem should be. So is it something that they've faced personally in the last year that they're jumping up and down right now going, but Katie hasn't talked about that? Or is it something that they recurrently see coming up that they feel really needs to feature here, or something that they see off in the horizon that maybe I've not thought of because it's only just starting to become a problem in their workplace? And it would be amazing to get their opinions, their ideas, their case studies, however it is that they want to talk to me about this, through the specific sign-up page on the website that I am going to share on this. I mean, I can give you, I don't know if you want me to rattle off the...
Yeah, go on, why not,
okay,
as we're
great.
talking about it.
Perfect. So it's www.katiebest.com/10th problem.
Well, there you go. That does what it says in the tin, /10th problem. We're going to put those in the show notes as well, Katie, so that people find. But get involved in that, because then they could actually in some ways feature in the book, couldn't they?
Absolutely.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to submit something and you want to submit it by name and you're happy with your name appearing, I would love to feature your case study in
Evidence.
the book. Absolutely, yeah, great evidence.
They could be part and parcel of the evidence. So the book will go through, there'll be a chapter on each of these problems and people can start to delve in it. So for the purposes of today, there's a framework that you've got that you're saying would help leaders in relation to any of these problems and or other problems that they find themselves dealing with. And you're calling it the 5E framework, aren't you?
Yeah.
So let's just list those, and we're going to go through that and give some people some insight in relation to this. So 5E framework, tell us about that. Let's list it for now. What are the 5 E's?
So establish, explore, envision, execute, and elevate.
Fine. And again, I'm going to put all of these in the show notes, Katie. So let's start with this. This is the framework that you're saying can help people resolve some of those problems that they're facing day to day.
Yes.
All right. Let's start with the first one, establish. What do we mean by that?
This is the most straightforward one.
Okay.
It's figuring out that you've got a problem and making sure that you're categorizing it correctly.
Okay.
So in this stage, it's about looking for the evidence that's out there that justifies or that contradicts what you think is going on, so that you can be really confident when you're saying this is a cultural problem, that it is a cultural problem.
Right.
So in the book, I'll have a tick list. You know, if you tick 5 of those things, then it is very likely that you've got a cultural problem.
Okay. So you'll help them identify what that problem is.
Helping to identify what those things might be.
And that can be tricky, can't it? Because a lot of people are very solution oriented in their approach, but they haven't actually figured out what the problem is in the first place.
Absolutely.
And then they've gone off and maybe they're wasting time, effort and money.
Yeah.
So the book will help them identify that.
Definitely. And digging deep into that, because I think exactly that point that you made is correct, that we rush to the solution.
Yeah.
We need to spend longer unpicking what's going on.
It's like that great quote, isn't it? You said you had an hour to save the world. You spend 50 minutes on defining what the problem is and 10 minutes on solving the problem.
Yeah.
So, all right, so that's to establish what the problem is. Then what's explore all about?
So explore is going deeper into that problem. So it's if we take something like engagement and you think that it's a motivation issue, is it coming from someone not feeling as though they're aligned with the company and so they're a bit switched off to their work? Is it because they're not being sufficiently rewarded? What is it that's really going on that is leading to that problem existing? Because the closer we can get to the root of that problem and exploring all its different tentacles, the more able we're going to be to deal with it and find a solution that fits the context and fits all the elements of the problem that are going on.
Tell me a little bit about, where does curiosity fit into that exploration piece?
So a big thing for me is I don't think leaders use research skills enough.
Okay.
And so encouraging them to be really curious will be a key part of that. So I'll be introducing them to some basic, I don't mean basic in the sense that they're not useful, but simple, easy to integrate into their working world to try and work out what's going on. Well, so how do you interview a member of staff in a really nice way that gets the most information out of them on a subject? Okay. How do you make sure that they really buy into the reward structure that you're using, for example?
Right. Well, if you can create simplicity from complexity, then that's a game changer as well. Okay, so to be curious in there, using those research skills, being open-minded, challenging your own biases as well. I'm assuming all of this is important when it comes to the exploration.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, very fair.
Okay. And then we go on to envision. What do we mean by that?
finding that solution that's going to fit the context,
Okay.
finding something that's going to work. So it's almost the other side of the coin from exploring. And exploring, you're looking at all those useful theories, models, ideas, research that you've done to see what's going on with the problem.
Yep.
And as you just said, then you spend your 10 minutes thinking about what the solution is. This is the solution. And the envision stage is so much easier if you've got all the information you need about what's going on with the problem. Often a solution then just naturally suggests itself.
Okay.
But it's about formalising what it is that you're going to do.
Tell me a little bit about information, because obviously in the environment we live in right now, and I spoke to Jonathan Reichenthal recently actually about ChatGPT and technological advances, and there's data everywhere. So leaders feel as if they're drinking from the fire hose. So tell me a little bit about your thoughts, because we always say that look, there's no way you're going to have 100% of all the information. Not in this day and age, it's not going to happen. Also, some of the news or the data out there will be wrong, will be flawed in some way. I'm not saying it's mischievous, but it's flawed in some way. So where do you sit in relation to a leader's use of data or information to feel empowered to make a decision and not paralyzed by feeling like they're drowning in it?
Yeah.
Where's that balance?
This is where the need for finding your own data really comes from.
Okay.
So not relying just on what's out there and knowing that this thing has motivated people in 100 companies. That's not your company. That's not your situation.
Yeah.
So holding your assumptions lightly, holding the research that's already out there lightly, but making sure that you're gathering your own data and your own insights and trusting your instincts whilst being aware of your biases.
Right.
I realise that's a lot to hold in balance. And that's why you need a framework with this stuff, really, is so that you don't become overwhelmed. You don't move on to envisioning until you've properly explored what's going on. But there is a point, you're right, at which you say, I've got enough, and then treading lightly. So a good leader, I don't think, is ever fully committed to what they're doing. There is always the possibility that something else is going to present itself that is going to mean that they need to pivot or change what they're doing ever so slightly.
I mean, doing nothing with a problem is a decision in itself, isn't
Yeah.
it? But actually that can be catastrophic
Yeah.
in some circumstances. I remember a story, whether this is true, if I've got this wrong, someone will tell me, about Colin Powell when he was Secretary of State. He had I think it was a 40 to 70 rule, that during a crisis or a critical decision, he'd try and get between 40 to 70% of the available information, and then they'd make a decision, and they would go with their gut, and they'd use their experience and their wisdom. Because the reality is, if they were waiting for 100%, it would never come, and or it might be too late in a critical situation. So it's a leader finding that balance and that comfort. Is that fair to think I've got enough, and I need to make a decision, and I can always pivot, but we've got to make a decision in order to move forward.
Completely. And you've got the most salient information. You don't need all the information.
Yes, and you can in some ways, I suppose, sieve out the garbage and see wood from trees, which, as I say that, I know it's more difficult. That's the truth. All right, let me take you on to the 40, which is execute. Right, tell me about that.
So that's the doing.
Okay.
So obviously that's very hard to write about, but what I'll be thinking about there is what are some of the things that could go wrong, or some of the areas where you might need extra support as you're putting your plan into place.
Okay.
So this brings us on to what we've just been talking about, really, around what happens if the plan doesn't seem quite right once you start to put it into place, or there's an area that you haven't really explored. So it's looking at the pitfalls and the additional opportunities that might come about as a result.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then that takes you off to the fifth E of the 5 E's, and that's elevate.
Yeah, so I think this one's really exciting.
Tell me.
Because I think that by this point, you're probably going to have developed some really good knowledge and skill around the area that we're talking about. So rather than engaging people being a weakness of yours, it may well become a strength, because you will be more clued into what's going on in your team than anybody elsewhere in the organisation is with their team.
Right.
So how can you then use this extra knowledge that you found to become particularly strong in that area? And so it will be 2 or 3 things that the leader might want to do to really lean into that area and to elevate their ability and to elevate what's going on with their team and their leadership.
Well, in some ways, they might become that go-to person in relation to that kind of conundrum or problem. Tell me something. When you say elevate as well, one of the things I also thought about, we talk about leaders getting off the dance floor and getting onto the balcony, whatever phrase works. Is there something to do with that as well, is sometimes to take yourself up away from a little bit of a more, a higher kind of view of the problem in order to get out of the weeds? Is there something to do with that as well?
I hadn't thought about it in that way, and I almost think that comes at an earlier stage. And when you're doing the exploration of the problem, it's not always the data you're going to be gathering and the ideas that you're going to be having aren't always going to be in the detail of the problem. Sometimes you're going to need to take a step back and look at it more holistically.
Right.
So, for example, if you are struggling with leading strategy, is it because you haven't taken that step back and looked at the whole organisation strategy? You're just so dug into your function strategy and what to do with it.
Right.
So, I mean, that's quite a simple example, but I think that's really where that step away becomes super important.
Okay, so tell me about the kind of the application of the 10 problems, tends to be decided,
Yeah.
in relation to small to medium and large businesses. Are you seeing a consistency? It's just that maybe the scale of the problem is different?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the thing. That's what makes this book potent, I think, is because they really are shared problems, whether you're big, small, medium, whether you're public sector or private, whether you're a frontline leader or you're the CEO. There will be differences. Context is important, and that's why doing your own research is critical. But when we look at it at these kind of bigger labels, everyone faces strategy problems. Everyone faces engagement and personal effectiveness problems.
So it's really unique right across all of the strata for leaders. As you kind of go through the work that you're doing at the moment, has anything surprised you in a post-pandemic environment that's challenging leaders? Just to, as you travel around and see and speak to so many people, is there anything that's kind of identifying itself to you that's new or unique? Or
And I think it's quite depressing, really.
Yeah. Go on.
Because it's probably the same answer that you've heard from lots of other people, but hybrid working, no one's got it, and companies have stopped talking about it in a formal way.
Why?
Because I think they're bored of it.
Okay.
The L&D function or the HR team have sort of thought, well, we've done all we can. We've run the training, tick. We can't use any more of our training budget on this. We've got all the tech. We just need to crack on with it.
Yeah.
And I think there's been a lack of realisation that it's just not bedded in, and people are still really struggling with the interaction that comes from hybrid, with the levels of trust. These problems haven't gone away. Yes, some companies have dealt with them better than others.
Yeah.
But so I also run a newsletter once a fortnight called Dear Katie, where people write into me with their messy leadership problems.
You're an agony aunt.
I'm an agony aunt, which I absolutely love. It's what I've always been destined to be. And I find so many of the problems people send in are still to do with hybrid working.
Okay. And how, as you mention it, how can people access Dear Katie?
Yeah, so here we go, another link.
Come on, we're putting it in there. That's what this is about, good resources.
So www.katiebest.com/sign-up.
Gotcha. And we'll put that
even
in
if you just go to my website, it pops up after a few seconds.
Okay,
anyway,
that's great. Well, Dear Katie. Coming back to hybrid, it's something I'm actually going to talk about in a later episode as well with some young leaders. Do you think we're just going to sleepwalk back to the way it was?
No, because I think people genuinely want to be able to work from home,
right,
to have that flexibility. And I think we live in a world where that is now expected. It's part of the employment expectations of many of the workforce.
Not everyone though, right?
Not
Some
everyone.
people are saying 5 days a week.
Yeah.
Get yourself back in.
Yeah.
Take it or leave it.
So it's mixed, but I think there's too many people out there who like walking their dog at lunchtime, or who want to collect their kids from school because it gives them that well-being.
We had that balance.
Yeah, or just even getting the headspace to write a doc, whatever it is, they don't need a reason necessarily. It's part of the contract that they want to have when they're working.
Yeah.
So I think it will stay, maybe not everywhere. And so we do need to dedicate efforts to making it work really well.
You had Adrian Simpson in, I think it was only last week, James, we're looking at James, and he said something really fascinating. He actually said, when you go into the office, that's when you should put your out of office on. Mm-hmm. Because going into the office is not to work. And I think he said this. He said, actually, you should go to the office for celebration, connection, and education. Mm. And I loved that.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure businesses have really signed up to that yet, or whether they've got the space for that. But there is definitely something about people saying, well, listen, I can do back-to-back Zoom calls or meetings from home. I don't need to come into an office. I don't need to spend the money, spend the time battling into central London or wherever they're working. Doesn't need to, if I come into work and we're celebrating something, we're really connecting on a human level, or I'm learning, I'm being educated, or I'm helping to share my learning. That's pretty powerful stuff.
Absolutely. And I really like that idea that there is some sort of framework that says, yes, this works well, this doesn't. There was a good article in Harvard Business Review about a year ago, I think, which highlighted 3 or 4 different areas.
Right.
And again, that was really potent, I think. It's working out where we need that face-to-face interaction and what that looks like, what that feels like, and then how we really maximise our efficiency, but also our happiness with online working.
Yeah, I remember talking to Nick Marks, actually. That was just a few months ago, and he did a YouTube video on happiness that's had millions of views, and he talked about the happiness index. So it's lovely that sometimes I can now start to draw on lots of different episodes and themes that are coming up. When's the book going to be available?
Such a good question. I wish I knew the answer.
Really? Okay, well, hopefully. When?
So at the moment I'm working with an agent and it's going out to publishers in the next couple of months.
Okay.
So shall I optimistically say about this time next year?
Okay, great. So we've got time then for people to listen, watch, get in touch with you, and maybe be part of the book. Now, this isn't your first book either, is it?
It is my first book.
Oh, is it your first book?
I've done lots of chapters in other books.
Oh, okay.
It is my, it's
Oh,
my
well, then
first book.
this is a big
It's a big
deal.
deal,
Oh,
yeah.
this is great then.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I wish you all the luck with that.
Thank you so
And
much.
come on, let's get some of the supporters, listeners, watchers, whatever you want to call it, of the Leadership Enigma involved, and I hope that we can in some way lend some weight to that.
That would be amazing. Thank you, Adam.
And also feel free to get in touch with any of the other wonderful guests.
Yes.
You know a number of them anyway,
Yeah.
which is great. Listen, Katie, thanks so much for coming back to the Leadership Enigma. It's a huge thank you, because I say you were one of the early adopters and supporters, and I'm grateful to you. And look at us now.
Oh, it's just amazing.
Do me a favour, come back to me next year when the book's out.
Yes,
and who
please.
knows, I think we might even look and sound slightly different again.
Amazing. Maybe we could have like party poppers or something.
I'm into all of that.
Yeah.
That's the way we roll.
Yeah,
It's
awesome.
brilliant. Listen, thanks so much. Take great care.
Thank you.
All right.
Join us again next week for more tips and strategies on the Leadership Enigma. We'd love to hear your comments on today's show, as well as suggestions for future topics and guests. Get in touch with your host on LinkedIn or visit the dedicated website, www.leadersenigma.com, powered by Transform Performance International, where you can access our exclusive learning, including books, videos, bonus content, assessments, and more. Please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on all your major podcast platforms. Thanks for listening.